I had a strange feeling that morning. Call it instinct. Call it 63 years of living. Something told me to pay attention. The scratch ticket was still sitting on my kitchen counter when my daughter-in-law called. I hadn't even told anyone yet. I'd bought it the night before at the gas station on Maple. The way I always do on the last Friday of the month. Just a habit my late wife Carol started years ago. $2. A little hope. Something to look forward to on a quiet evening. I'd scratched it alone at the kitchen table with a penny. The way Carol always did it. And I had to scratch it 3 times because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. $2,300,000. I sat there for a long time. The house was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a dog was barking somewhere down the street. I kept looking at the ticket, then looking away, then looking back. I called the lottery office's verification line at 8 in the morning when they opened and listened to the automated confirmation twice. Then I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat back down and cried a little. Because the first thought I had was that I wished Carol could have seen it. She passed 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and cruel. The way that disease always is. We'd been married 31 years. I was still figuring out how to be a person without her. I didn't plan to tell anyone until Monday. When I could get to the lottery office and talk to a financial advisor, that was the sensible thing. But my son called Saturday morning to check in, the way he does every weekend. And I heard myself telling him. I couldn't help it. He's my son. He's 34 years old. And I've loved him since the moment they put him in my arms in that hospital room. I told him I had some news, and before I could even build up to it, I just said it. I won the lottery. $2.3 million. The silence on his end lasted about 4 seconds. Then he said, "Dad, are you serious?" "I'm serious." I said. He let out a sound I hadn't heard from him since he was a little boy, this pure, uncomplicated joy. He said his wife was right there. Could he tell her? And I said, of course. I heard him relay the news and heard her react in the background. This high, excited sound. He asked if they could come over for dinner that night to celebrate. Just the 3 of us. And I said yes. I went to the grocery store and bought a nice piece of salmon and a bottle of wine and a lemon cake from the bakery section because my son has loved lemon cake since he was 8 years old. I want to tell you something about my daughter-in-law before I go further. Because you need to understand the full picture. I have tried, for 6 years, to have a good relationship with her. I want to be fair. She is not a warm person, that is just the truth, but I told myself that was my problem. Not hers. Not everyone expresses affection the same way. My son loved her. That was what mattered. She was sharp and capable, and kept their home immaculate, and worked hard at her marketing job. There were small things over the years. Comments that landed a little wrong. A tendency to redirect conversations about Carol. As though my grief was an inconvenience. A coolness toward me that I could never quite locate the source of, but I had never had a reason to distrust her. Not once. Not until that Saturday evening. They arrived at 6. My son hugged me in the doorway. Long and hard. The way he used to when he was a teenager coming home from a school trip. My daughter-in-law hugged me too, and said how wonderful. How absolutely wonderful. And smiled with all her teeth. We sat in the living room, and I showed them the ticket inside the protective sleeve I'd bought at the office supply store. And we talked about what comes next. The lump sum versus the annuity. The taxes. Whether to hire an attorney. My daughter-in-law had a lot of opinions about all of it. She'd clearly already been thinking. She mentioned a wealth management firm her colleague used and said I should call them on Monday before I did anything official. I said I'd look into it. We moved into the kitchen for dinner. I was at the stove finishing the salmon when my neighbor knocked on the back door. Her name is Dorothy, and she is 71 years old. And she has lived next door to me for 22 years. She and Carol were close friends. She brings me food, sometimes casseroles, banana bread, and I shovel her driveway in the winter without being asked. We have the easy, unspoken arrangement of people who have simply been present for each other through a great deal of life. I opened the back door, and she was holding a container of her apple crisp, which she knew was my favorite. I told her we had company but invited her in for just a minute. She came in, said hello to my son, nodded at my daughter-in-law. I introduced her as my neighbor Dorothy, my good friend. Then I turned back to the stove. Dorothy said she'd leave the apple crisp on the counter and let herself out. I thanked her. I heard her set it down. I heard the small sounds of her being in the kitchen behind me, gathering her container lid, preparing to go. Then she appeared at my elbow. She leaned in close, very quiet, and said, "Thomas, I just saw her put something in your glass." I didn't move. I kept my eyes on the salmon in the pan. "Your wine glass," she said. "On the counter by the window. Something from her pocket," I said, very quietly. "Okay. Go home. Lock your door." She left without another word. Dorothy has known me for 22 years. She understood the tone of my voice. I stood at that stove for another 30 seconds, just breathing. I thought about Carol. I thought about my son in the next room, who at that moment believed he was about to have a nice family dinner. I thought about what kind of man I wanted to be in the next 10 minutes. Then I turned around, dried my hands on the dish towel, and picked up both wine glasses from the counter. I carried them to the sink and said I was going to rinse them and use the nicer glasses, the crystal ones Carol's sister had given us as a wedding gift, that I kept in the high cabinet. My daughter-in-law's eyes followed me for a moment and then moved away. She said that sounded lovely. I rinsed both glasses thoroughly. I got the crystal glasses down from the cabinet. I poured the wine. I brought everything to the table. We had dinner. The salmon was good. My son talked about work, about a project he was proud of, about a trip they were thinking about taking in the spring. My daughter-in-law ate her food and smiled and asked about my plans for the money. Completely normal, completely calm. I watched her. I thought about that pocket. I thought about the glass by the window. After dinner, when my son was in the living room looking at something on his phone, she was alone with me in the kitchen for a moment while I wrapped the leftover fish. She came to stand beside me at the counter. She said, in a low and very careful voice, that she just wanted to mention something. She'd been doing some research. She said that in cases like mine, it was important to have the right people around, people who understood finances, and that she could really help me navigate the process if I wanted. She said she'd been thinking about it all evening, and she had some ideas about how to structure things to benefit the whole family going forward. I looked at her. I said, "I appreciate that. Let me think about it." She smiled and said, "Of course. No pressure." She just wanted me to know the offer was there. They left at 9. I hugged my son at the door and told him I loved him, which I meant with my whole chest, the way a parent means it when they have just discovered something that might break them. He said he loved me too, and that we should do this again soon. I said yes. I closed the door. I went to the kitchen and called Dorothy. She answered on the first ring. I said, "I need you to tell me exactly what you saw." She told me carefully, precisely the way Dorothy does everything. She had come into the kitchen and set the apple crisp on the counter near the refrigerator. From where she was standing, she had a clear angle to the counter by the window. My daughter-in-law had been standing there with her back, half turned to the room. Dorothy saw her take something from the front pocket of her cardigan and tip it into the glass on the right. A small capsule or a powder, she couldn't see exactly. It was quick, but she was certain. She said, "Thomas, I am certain. I've been standing in kitchens my whole life and I know what I saw." I thanked her. I told her she was a good person and a good friend, and that Carol always knew it. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after I hung up. In the morning, I called an attorney before I called anyone else. His name is Martin, and he has been my attorney for 15 years. Estate work. Property. Nothing dramatic until now. He listened to everything without interrupting. Then he said, I needed to go to the police, and I needed to do it that morning, before I did anything with the lottery money. And he would meet me there. He said I should bring Dorothy. I called Dorothy. She said, give me 20 minutes to put on decent shoes. At the police station, a detective named Reyes took our statements separately, and then together. She was thorough, and she was kind. She asked me several times, in different ways, whether I was certain about what I was alleging, that my daughter-in-law had attempted to drug me, and each time I said yes. And Dorothy said yes. And the detective wrote things down in her notebook and nodded slowly. Dorothy's statement was detailed and consistent. The detective said they would look into it. On Monday, I went to the lottery office and began the official process. I hired a financial advisor, someone my attorney recommended. Not the firm my daughter-in-law had mentioned. I said nothing to my son about any of it. That was the hardest part. He called Sunday evening and I talked to him for 20 minutes about baseball and the weather and whether I should repaint the front porch. And the whole time I knew what was coming. And he didn't. The detective called me Wednesday morning. She said they had executed a search warrant on my son's home. They had found, in my daughter-in-law's bedside table, 2 prescription bottles that were not prescribed to her. One was a sedative. One was a blood thinner. My doctor, whom the detective had spoken with, confirmed that given my cardiac history and current medications, ingesting either substance in an uncontrolled dose could have caused serious complications. The blood thinner, depending on the quantity, could have been life-threatening. I sat down when she told me that. The detective said they had also obtained my daughter-in-law's phone records. There were messages to a man not her husband discussing the lottery. Discussing me. Discussing what they described as the plan and how to ensure things went the way they needed to. The messages went back 4 months. 4 months before I won anything, because apparently my daughter-in-law had known for some time that I occasionally played. She'd been in the kitchen when I'd mentioned it to Carol once. Years ago. And she had not forgotten. My son did not know. That is the thing I keep coming back to. My son did not know. When the detective brought him in for questioning, he was, from what Martin told me afterward, completely blindsided. He kept asking what was happening. Kept saying there had to be a mistake. When they showed him the phone messages, he read them twice and then put his face in his hands. He called me from a parking lot outside the police station at 6 in the evening. I answered. He said, "Dad." That was all he could get out at first. Just that one word. I said, "I know." He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know. He swore to me he didn't know. And he needed me to believe him, even if I couldn't forgive him, for the fact that she had been in his house and in his life, and he hadn't seen it. I told him I believed him, because I did. I have known my son for 34 years. I know the sound of his voice when he is telling the truth. I also told him that we had a long road ahead of us, and that I needed some time, and that the most important thing right now was to let the process work. He said, "Okay, Dad, whatever you need." My daughter-in-law was arrested and charged. The man from the messages was brought in for questioning. At trial, the prosecutor laid it out. Clearly, she had planned to incapacitate me, gain my trust and access during a vulnerable period, and position herself to influence how the money was managed. Her attorney argued the substances were for personal use and Dorothy's account was mistaken. The jury deliberated for less than a day. She was sentenced to 5 years. My son filed for divorce before the sentencing hearing. He sat behind me in the courtroom, and when it was over, he put his hand on my shoulder, and I put my hand over his, and we sat there for a minute without saying anything. There are things I want you to know about what came after, because I think they matter. I did not give my son money. Not immediately. I told him that I loved him and that we were going to rebuild what we had. Slowly. But that I needed to trust my own instincts again before I trusted anyone else's intentions around this money. He said he understood. He moved into a smaller apartment and went back to work and called me every Saturday morning, the way he always had. We had dinner most Sundays. Slowly, carefully, we found our way back to each other. A year later, I helped him with a down payment on a house. Not because he asked, he never asked, but because I wanted to. Because he is my son, and I chose to. Dorothy I took care of right away. I wrote her a check for $50,000 the week after the verdict. She stood in my kitchen and looked at it, and then looked at me and said she couldn't accept it. I told her Carol would have wanted her to have it. That settled it. She cried a little, and so did I. I also made a donation to the cardiac unit at the hospital where Carol was treated. Not a large one in the grand scheme of things, but meaningful to me. The nurses there were so kind to her in her last weeks. It felt right. I had a financial advisor and an attorney and a plan. I bought nothing extravagant. I repainted the front porch. Finally, I got the roof repaired. I put the rest somewhere sensible and let it sit. People ask me sometimes what it feels like, the money. The whole thing. I tell them it feels quieter than I expected. The money itself doesn't feel like much day to day. What I think about more is the Saturday evening at the kitchen table, the 2 glasses of wine, the feeling of standing at the stove and knowing something was wrong and choosing to think clearly instead of react. That is what I feel good about. Not the lottery. That, and I think about Dorothy, who came in through the back door with apple crisp on a Saturday evening and changed the entire course of what happened next. She wasn't looking for anything. She wasn't calculating anything. She just saw something wrong and walked to my elbow and told me the truth. That is such a simple thing. It is so rare. Carol used to say she had good instincts about people. She was the one who had insisted, 22 years ago, that we go introduce ourselves to the new neighbor moving in next door. This woman unpacking boxes alone on a Sunday afternoon. I was watching football. Carol brought cookies. I thought it was unnecessary. Carol was right. The way she usually was. Some evenings I sit on the back porch and watch the lights come on in Dorothy's kitchen and think about all the ways a life connects itself together over time. A conversation here. A kindness there. A woman with cookies standing on a stranger's doorstep. You cannot plan any of it. You cannot buy it. You can only try to be the kind of person who deserves it. That is the only lesson I have from all of this. If you want one, be that person. Be Dorothy. Someday, if you are very lucky and you have lived well, someone will be Dorothy for you. I still buy a scratch ticket on the last Friday of every month. $2. The penny. Carol's penny. Still sitting in the junk drawer where she left it. I haven't won again. I don't expect to. But I scratch every one.